if the random Craigslist poster who hired you to film his autobiography turned out to be a homicidal maniac again, what would you do? What seemed at first like a simple video project just keeps getting weirder and weirder and weirder. And just when you think it couldn't possibly get even weirder than that, my God, it totally does. However, as the red flags keep piling up, one can't help but wonder whether the star of the show is simply putting on an act for the cameras, or if he really is the bloodthirsty monster he claims to be. I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat the serial killer in Creep 2. Aaron just turned 40, and he's having a hard time with it. Something about this milestone birthday has left him unable to enjoy his favorite activities. Just look at him sitting across from his best friend, Dave, over a couple of beers. Sure, he might act like he's having a good time, but deep down he's writhing in unbearable anguish at the thought all his best moments are behind him, even gems like these. Now, if you've seen the first movie, then you already know Aaron's not really his name. This guy is not really his best friend, and something very bad is about to happen to someone in this room. Unfortunately for Dave, he has no idea about any of this, although it seems he's starting to figure it out after learning that Aaron was behind a bunch of threatening videos he's been receiving. Let's see what he does with this information. I guess that answers that. Sure, it's not like Dave would have expected the new friend he's been hanging out over the last few weeks with was actually plotting to kill him. But once Aaron spilled the beans about secretly recording him since the day they first met, that distinct possibility should have definitely run across his mind. At that point, he should have paid far more attention to his so-called best friend's every move. Take, for example, the way Aaron was holding his right hand just below the table to conceal the knife. As the saying goes, eyes are a window into the soul, and hands are a window to intent. He would have had to have known Dave would freak out about this, so it would make sense for him to be holding some kind of weapon. Either way, I probably wouldn't have gotten closer to him with my neck stretched out to get out of my chair. Given the nature of the threats he's been sending, it would have been reasonable for us to launch a preemptive strike with our beer bottle to buy ourselves time to retreat. At the very least, this would have kept one of our arms up in case he presented a gun or knife, which he totally did. Nerds, there are some of you that have watched my videos. You've listened to my spiels about the Ridge, and yet you defy reason. You know who you are, but more importantly, I know who you are. You have between August 15th to September 30th, 2023 to resolve this treachery before action is taken against you. Coincidentally, that's how much time you have to enter the Ridge's Hennessy sweepstakes for a chance to win a brand new Ford Bronco Velociraptor or $75,000 in cash. You don't even have to spend a single rapidly depreciating dollar to enter. You get one bonus entry for every $1 you spend on the site, and custom Hennessy products come with up to 1,000 entries. If you use my link, ridge.com/nerdexplains, you'll get 10 bonus entries at checkout and get 10% off, as well as using my code NERDEXPLAINS. While there are 30 plus colors and styles, including carbon fiber, forged ember, and burnt Damascus to choose from, the Hennessy Special Edition with its Hennessy logo and signature racing stripe will fool people into thinking you actually own an Exorcist Camaro. Get the matching key case to go along with it. Look, the Ridge is the race car of the wallet world. Your animal skin is like driving your money around in a horse and carriage. 12 cards plus room for cash while cutting on size and weight for maximum speed. Same deal with the key case. Holds 6 keys with none of that sloppy jingle due to its rigid suspension tension system. Get the picture? Plus, if you purchase the wallet and key case together, you get 30% off. If you value your life, well, now is the best time to consider purchasing a Ridge wallet of your own volition. Go to ridge.com/nerdexplains. Get those 10 bonus entries and use my code NERDEXPLAINS to get 10% off. Thanks Ridge for sponsoring this video. Ultimately, Dave didn't put up much of a fight, but this isn't what's got Aaron feeling all down in the dumps. The way he sees it, the entire affair was simply uninspired start to finish. If only there were a way for him to rekindle the magic of taking human lives. And what better way to channel your inner psychopath than through a self-aggrandizing autobiographical documentary? In enters Sarah. She's been making a go of it, online vlogging her various encounters with all manners of weirdos she's met through random Craigslist ads. Sadly, the reception has been non-existent, but she refuses to give up on her dream just because no one finds her content interesting. According to her, she just needs to step outside her comfort zone even further, which is why she drove 3 hours out to the middle of nowhere to film an unknown video project for some dude she's never met, although he certainly doesn't waste any time bringing her up to speed.
I am what is commonly known as a serial killer.
Humble brag much? So obviously, Sarah has no idea how badly she just fucked up by walking into this guy's house, and it's pretty clear she doesn't believe he's ever killed anyone in his life. Why would she, right? I mean, it's not like an actual serial killer would voluntarily record himself confessing to all his heinous crimes, you know, unless he doesn't intend for her to ever leave with the footage. Whatever the case, if I were in her line of work, there's a few general guidelines I would follow on every outing to improve my chances of coming home alive. First of all, I would change careers. That whole narrative about maniacs luring people to their deaths off Craigslist exists for a reason. Doing dumb shit like this completely by yourself is exactly how you wake up wearing 4 different gym bags. This brings me to my next point, which goes back to my video on the first movie. Bring a friend. Nothing in Aaron's listing mentioned coming alone, and if it did, that'd be a clear sign not to take the job in the first place. Plus, the unplanned presence of another person can help us gauge his intentions. If we walk in and he immediately starts flipping out over the fact that we brought someone with us, that's a pretty good indication we need to GTFO. Actually, now that I think about it, we could test this out before we even leave by texting him and saying something like, "My 3 former dev guru brothers and I are on our way." Other than that, the biggest piece of advice I can give to anyone going anywhere is to make sure someone else knows where you're going to be, when you're gonna be back, and who you're going to be with. Most of this could be accomplished ahead of time by sending the address to someone we trust implicitly. As for how we tell them who we're with, our best option in this case would be snapping a discreet pic with our phone and sending it over with the dude's name. Couldn't hurt to send over the license plate and description of any vehicles parked out front either. Sure, a lot of this might sound incredibly paranoid, but as we've already established, Sarah's taking a huge risk by coming out here, so we might as well take every precaution we can. Even something as simple as Googling the address ahead of time could prove life-saving. For example, what if it's a rental property and the managers aren't aware of anyone staying out there? That'd probably be good to know before knocking on the front door. Finally, aside from arming yourself with the best possible weapons you have access to, the only other recommendation I have is dropping subtle hints to the client that someone else knows we're here and is expecting to hear from us in the near future. Something like, "An old friend actually lives nearby. I told him I'd come by later." This will at the very least inform him you'll be missed very quickly should he try anything crazy. The good news is, Aaron promises he won't kill her within the next 24 hours, which is a very odd thing to say unless he's implying he'll kill her sometime after that. Makes sense, I guess. Everyone knows you don't murder a videographer until after they finish editing. However, just to drive home how perfectly safe she is, Aaron goes on to tell her she can take the $1,000 promised for the job and leave immediately if she feels uncomfortable. And if you believe that, I've got a video project of my own I need help with out in the middle of Death Valley. Don't bother calling ahead. Just head out there and await further instructions. Of course, for Sarah, it's not about the money. It's about milking this clearly deranged individual for every last second of content she possibly can, which in theory should lead to even more money. Whatever the case, she agrees to help Hannibal get his mojo back, after which Aaron decides to kick things off with one of his more recent home videos. Ah, yes. I remember that moron. Aaron tortured him for over a week, and he still agreed to a meeting. Still, by far, his dumbest decision was sitting with his back to the unknown, while he knew a psychotic stalker murderer person was coming to meet with him. Part of me still thinks he was deliberately trying to subtract himself from the gene pool for the sake of future test scores. The world may never know. Anyway, just like Aaron's admission of being a serial killer, Sarah doubts the legitimacy of what she just saw, and to a degree, I can see where she's coming from. Dude has expressed interest in filmmaking and mentioned a movie in his personal ad. This could easily be a scene from some obscure found footage film or even something he made himself. I mean, it's definitely the latter, but not in the way she's probably thinking. That being said, there's no real reason to speculate here, as the discovery of a brutally dismembered man in broad daylight almost certainly made the news. And in the age of pocket supercomputers, all Sarah has to do is go to the bathroom and look up "man found hacked to death by lake" to see whether anything comes up matching the environment. I'd want to make sure I was on the ground floor when doing this, however, as it'd probably be a good idea to climb out the window if we get a hit. Yes, videos of people being murdered for real do exist online, but when some guy just told you he's a murderer and then plays footage of a known murder that can't be found anywhere else, I'd say he's probably telling the truth. In the meantime, whether intentional or not, Sarah does the right thing by playing it cool and not asking too many questions about what she just saw. Then again, maybe she played it a little too cool, as now Aaron wants to show her something else. And he's naked. Awesome. Yeah, he said something about getting this out of the way so she doesn't have to wonder what he looks like under his clothes while they work together. Pretty sure Harvey Weinstein once said something similar. With that out of the way, Aaron and Sarah can finally head out to start filming. And right away, I'm seeing a huge red flag. No, not the fact that he's wearing a cheap costume wolf mask while driving. Although, yeah, that's definitely a bad idea. It's the fact he's driving Sarah's car. First of all, why can't we take his own vehicle? Does he not want it showing up on camera? But of course, the biggest problem is that we've given him control, however temporary, of our car keys, which, being all the way out here, serve as our primary lifeline. That is to say, what happens if we get to wherever we're going and he refuses to give them back? Or worse.
Well, what if I told you that at the end of this road, I was going to cut off your head?
See, that's exactly why I never let other people drive my car. We better make damn sure we get our keys back when this is over. Upon reaching the filming location, Aaron has a complete and utter melty at the realization that water levels rise and lower over time. Although, looking at the vegetation and surrounding rocks, it seems pretty obvious there was never the raging river of neck-deep water he claims was here back when he allegedly scouted it. Still, the show must go on, and Sarah manages to talk him into doing the scene regardless. But whether it's passing planes, unruly man buns, or insolent wildlife, something always seems to get in the way of Aaron's vision, ultimately resulting in him storming off set and angrily planking further down the creek. I legitimately could not make this shit up. Oh yeah, and let me remind you, this guy's supposedly shelling out $1,000 a day for this. I understand some people don't care about money, but if that were me face down in the sand right now, I wouldn't have set foot out of frame until we got what we came for. I don't care how many Tweety birds I had to murder. As for Sarah, Aaron's childish and attention-seeking behavior isn't anything new, but that doesn't mean she should ignore it. There's clearly something fundamentally wrong with this guy, and only a fool would stick around to uncover the totality of it. Unfortunately, Sarah is simply dead set on farming this wacko for content, which is why she decides to ride out the rest of his tantrum, even though he's already told her to leave. Don't get me wrong, I could totally see Aaron's lunacy going viral, but for that to happen, we'll need to actually survive this nightmare, and the jury is still out on whether or not he might actually be a killer. Well, from Sarah's perspective, that is. On that note, while Creeper's out having his little sulky soak, now would be a great time to look into the snuff film he showed us earlier, assuming assuming we got our keys back. We could easily slip away if our suspicions were confirmed. And if it all turns out to be some kind of prank video or whatever, then we can at least feel a little less stupid about sticking around. Instead, Sarah throws caution to the wind and joins Aaron in the hot tub for more tales of interest from his supposed career as a serial killer, during which time he regales her to the story of his very first kill, as well as this juicy detail.
I lied to you earlier about my beard holes. It's actually a rare disease called trichotillomania.
Nah, sounds made up. Oh, but nerd, you say? Why would you bore us with this nonsense about Aaron's patchy beard, instead of letting us hear about him strangling some dude to death and then spooning his naked corpse? Well, that's because it's important, okay? Trust me. You'll see here soon in just a minute. For now, we're left with Sarah making the profoundly stupid decision to go take a shower in this dude's house after hearing all this. Obviously, she thinks it's all BS, but why would some melancholy maniac rambling incoherently about seemingly fictitious homicides make her feel comfortable enough to completely hose herself like this? Remember what I said about the car keys? Well, you can say goodbye to those, not to mention her phone and that street legal pocket knife she slid in your boot. Fact is, if this guy's for real, she's pretty much just signed her own death warrant, and while it might seem unlikely from her POV that he is, there's no way she could possibly know for sure. Yet, all for the sake of YouTube fame, she still goes out into near pitch darkness to play hide and seek with him while he's swinging around a butcher knife. I mean, killer or not, you've heard of accidents, right? Sarah even goes as far as to ask him about what weapon he'd use to murder her, and she's either too overcome with normalcy bias or too focused on the shot to pick up this little tidbit from his reply.
I promised I wouldn't kill you, and I never lie.
I lied to you earlier about my beard holes.
And there it is. Of course, as I've basically beaten to death at this point, Sarah's convinced her little cash cow is just some crazy goofball that wouldn't hurt a fly, and so even if she were aware of this inconsistency, she'd probably still brush it off as nothing. Knowing all this, it should come as no surprise that a few minutes later, when Aaron straight up asks her, "Do you believe that I'm a serial killer?" she very sincerely says no, predictably raising the logical question of why a murderer would invite someone into their home to film them. There are just two problems with her line of thinking. First and foremost is that you should never assume someone unhinged enough to butcher dozens of innocent people thinks the same way you do. Fact is, plenty of serial killers throughout history have deliberately compromised their own OPSEC for the sole purpose of achieving fame. So the idea of one wanting to make a documentary about himself isn't all that far-fetched. The other problem is that this isn't his house. Remember that sign on the hot tub? Children must have adult supervision. Why would he keep something like that up if this were really his place? It seems to me like this has to be some kind of vacation rental, and judging by Aaron's sudden change of plans, he definitely doesn't care to get his deposit back.
You want me to take this axe and chop your head off?
Seems straightforward enough to me. Sadly, Aaron's attempt at encouraging her by calling it euthanasia ultimately falls flat, as pretty much anyone with a brain knows that would never hold up in court. Well, that, or she might have certain reservations about beheading someone she only just met. Either way, it's clearly a no-go on her part, but like any good lunatic, Aaron has a backup plan. Now, I'm not exactly sure whether I can show this on YouTube, but suffice it to say, his plan involves a 20-foot ceiling and a 12-foot rope. Now, in case that description is still too hot for the censors, let it be known that he's secretly wearing a harness designed to distribute the force evenly throughout his body to prevent any injury. And I don't just mean Mark Duplass the actor. Aaron's canonically wearing one as part of a sick-minded prank, and given Sarah's response, it totally worked. Naturally, she's pretty upset about being put in that position, although I'm not quite sure what else she could have expected after watching Aaron tie a noose around his neck and climb over the railing. In any case, the experience is enough for her to finally call it quits. But just as she's about to walk out the door, Aaron manages to talk her down by showing her the harness I mentioned earlier. Yeah, I don't know about you, but this would only strengthen my resolve to get the hell out of here. The fact he even had a harness to begin with suggests he was planning this from the very beginning, which means he's almost certainly tanked the documentary on purpose just just so he could take things in this direction. In that case, dude's been screwing with us since the moment we walked in the door. God only knows what else he has planned. Unfortunately, it seems none of this even crosses Sarah's mind, and she pretty much goes right back to trusting him implicitly, or at the very least, enough to follow Aaron out into the woods for yet another surprise. Can you guess what that is?
Oh, shit.
Well, it certainly took him long enough. However, this freshly dug grave isn't what it looks like. Well, okay, it's exactly what it looks like, but it's not going to be used like you might expect. You see, Aaron isn't planning on dumping Sarah's body in there after brutally stabbing her to death with her own pocket knife. No, it turns out he brought her here so they could both take turns stabbing themselves with a knife, and then crawl inside and die together like Romeo and Juliet. It's totally different. Of course, being the gentleman he is, Aaron volunteers to go first, but by the time he passes the blade to Sarah, it's clear she has no intention of following through. Honestly, I'm just glad she waited until he handed her the weapon before she took off running. Now, aside from not knowing the area, Sarah pretty much has all the advantages here. I mean, for starters, Aaron is bleeding profusely, and even if his wounds aren't immediately fatal, they're likely to hinder his ability to move and fight to some extent. Furthermore, the key to losing a pursuer in any environment is evading their line of sight, and given his vision is limited to what he can see in the narrow flashlight beam, it'll be easy to see where he's looking at any given time. The problem is, it'll be just as dark for her as it is for him, at least until her eyes adjust to the ambient light. Were I in Sarah's position, once I manage to break contact, which in this case happens rather quickly due to Aaron's injuries, I would take cover behind a large tree until my night vision improved, all while silently monitoring his location by listening for movements and periodically looking for his light whenever it wasn't shining in my direction. Once I could actually see a foot in front of my face, I'd start moving as far away from him as fast as I could. Yes, this will probably result in me becoming hopelessly lost, but it's unlikely we'd find our way back to the house without his help anyway, and even if we did, the still has our car keys. Gee, I wonder how he got those. Ultimately, I'd much rather take my chances surviving out in these temperate weather conditions than risking a direct confrontation. Sure, Aaron might look vulnerable right now, but there's no telling whether he might have other weapons on him somewhere. Given what we've seen from him so far, he's almost certainly playing up his injuries to bait an attack. And sure enough, Sarah finds this out the hard way. Although had she waited for him to get a little closer before striking, that might have turned out differently. However, out of everything Aaron told her today that turned out to be false, the one thing he wasn't lying about was feeling past his prime. Dude's stabbing skills clearly are not all what they used to be, and in the end, it cost him everything. Should have hung it up when he had the chance. And with that, Sarah lives on to hopefully learn a valuable lesson about meeting anonymous strangers online. However, sometime later, the realization she's being watched on the train reveals yet another important takeaway from this experience. Never forget the double tap. In the end, Sarah managed to make it out alive. However, not without sustaining serious, potentially life-altering injuries in the process. That said, had she maintained control over her vehicle and looked deeper into the murder Aaron showed her in the beginning, it's likely she would have realized he was legit in time to make her escape, thereby sparing herself all the trouble that would follow. And while this might not have gotten rid of Aaron completely, it would have given her much more time to prepare for future encounters. For that reason, I think Creep 2 was beaten. Moral of the story, Craigslist is for couches and serial killers.